The sound you are hearing is the last thing many sailors in the Pacific ever heard. It is the sound of a divine wind, a human missile. November 25, 1944, a Japanese kamikaze slams into the flight deck of the USS Essex. The explosion is catastrophic. Aviation fuel turns the deck into an inferno. Men are vaporized. Steel melts. By all logic of naval warfare, this ship should be dead. But the Essex didn't sink. It didn't even stop. Most warships get one life. They serve, they age, and they are turned into razor blades. But this ship was different. It was reported sunk by enemy propaganda, only to return as a ghost to haunt them. It stared down Soviet nuclear submarines during the most dangerous 13 days in human history. And when mankind took its first steps into the cosmos, this was the ship waiting to catch them when they fell back to Earth. This isn't just a story about steel and rivets. It is the biography of the most resilient ship in the history of the United States Navy, the carrier that lived 3 lives. This is the legend of the USS Essex.
To understand the Essex, you have to understand the rage that built her. December 7th, 1941. The pride of the U.S. Navy lies broken in the mud of Pearl Harbor. The battleships, the old queens of the sea, are burning. The Japanese Empire had delivered a masterstroke. But in their calculated precision, the Japanese made a fatal error. They missed the aircraft carriers. The Enterprise, the Lexington, the Saratoga, they were at sea. And in that moment, the doctrine of naval warfare changed forever. The battleship was dead. The carrier age had begun. America didn't just need more ships, they needed a new kind of ship, a vessel designed not for peacekeeping, but for pure, unadulterated vengeance. Enter the Essex class. Designated CV-9, the USS Essex was the lead ship of this new breed, and she was a monster. Let's look at the numbers because they are staggering. Over 870 feet long, displacing 27,000 tons standard, but often sailing at over 36,000 tons, fully loaded. She was a floating city fueled by heavy oil and hatred. But her real secret wasn't just size, it was innovation. Previous carriers had elevators in the middle of the flight deck. If the elevator broke, flight operations stopped. If a bomb hit the elevator, the ship was useless. The Essex introduced the deck edge elevator, a massive platform hanging off the side of the hull. It meant she could cycle planes faster, rearm quicker, and launch strikes while simultaneously recovering aircraft. She carried nearly 100 aircraft, the deadly F-6F Hellcats, the beastly Helldivers, and the Avengers. On December 31st, 1942, barely a year after Pearl Harbor, she was commissioned. There was no champagne celebration, no time for parades. The Pacific was calling.
By 1944, the Essex wasn't just a ship, she was the flagship of destruction. But her true test and her rise to legendary status came in June 1944, the Battle of the Philippine Sea. The Japanese Navy, desperate to stop the American advance, launched Operation Argo. They threw everything they had left into one massive gamble. Hundreds of aircraft, their best carriers, their remaining aces. They expected a decisive battle. What they got was a slaughter. The Essex stood at the center of the line. Her combat information center, a dark room filled with glowing radar screens, detected the incoming Japanese waves miles away. This was technology the enemy simply didn't have.
American pilots, flying the superior Hellcats, were vectored to intercept before the Japanese could even see the US fleet. It was so one-sided that it wasn't even called a battle. A pilot from the Lexington radioed back, "Hell, this is like an old-time turkey shoot down home." The name stuck, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. In 2 days, the Japanese lost 3 carriers and over 600 aircraft. The Essex's air group was ruthless, wiping out entire squadrons. The backbone of Japanese naval aviation wasn't just broken, it was pulverized. But the Essex did something else during this time. She became a ghost. Tokyo Rose, the Japanese propaganda broadcaster, repeatedly announced that the Essex had been sunk. They told their people the blue ghost was at the bottom of the ocean. Imagine the terror of a Japanese commander who, after being told the Essex is dead, looks through his binoculars a week later and sees CV-9 launching another airstrike. She became a psychological weapon, a symbol that the US Navy could not be killed.
But invincibility is a myth. And on November 25th, 1944, the war finally caught up with the Essex. Japan had run out of skilled pilots. They had run out of strategy. All they had left was fanaticism. A Yokosuka D-4Y Judy, a fast dive bomber, slipped through the radar net. The gunners on the Essex saw it. The 20mm Ehrlichens chattered. The 40mm Bofors thumped, throwing up a wall of lead. They hit the plane. It was smoking. It was damaged. But the pilot didn't pull up. He didn't bail out. He corrected his course. He was aiming for the flight deck, specifically the fully fueled plane sitting ready for takeoff. Boom! The impact rocked the 27,000-ton Leviathan. The plane disintegrated, its engine acting like a cannonball, while its bomb detonated amidst the parked American aircraft. Instantly, the portside flight deck became a crematorium. This is where a normal crew abandons ship. This is where a normal ship dies. The fire was hot enough to melt aluminum. Ammunition was cooking off, exploding in the heat. But the crew of the Essex, they didn't run away from the fire. They ran into it. Teenagers, 18 or 19 years old, grabbed hoses and walked into the flames. They physically pushed burning fighter planes over the side of the ship to save the vessel. 15 sailors died, 44 were wounded. But here is the statistic that defies belief. 30 minutes. That is how long it took for the fires to be controlled. And within hours, the Essex was recovering aircraft again. The flight deck was patched with steel plates, the blood was washed away, and the ship turned back into the wind to launch more planes. The kamikaze pilot had given his life to destroy her. All he did was scratch the paint. The Essex was truly indestructible. The war ended. The Essex sat in Tokyo Bay, watching the surrender. She had earned 13 battle stars. She had launched the planes that sank the battleship Yamato. She had won. But peace is the enemy of warships. In 1947, the order came down: decommission. The mighty Essex was towed to a shipyard, drained of fluids, sealed up, and left to rust in the mothball fleet. She was a relic, a dinosaur of a bygone era. The world had changed. The propeller age was over. The jet age had arrived. And jets were too heavy, too fast, and too dangerous for the World War II flight decks of the Essex.
It seemed her story was over. But a new war was brewing, a colder war, and America found itself needing its champion one more time. 1951. The Essex is dragged out of retirement, but the ship that emerged from the shipyard wasn't the same one that fought the Japanese. She was Frankenstein's monster of naval power. They tore up her flight deck. They installed massive steam catapults capable of flinging a 20-ton jet from 0 to 150 miles per hour in 2 seconds. They added the angled deck, a revolutionary design that allowed for safer landings. She was no longer just CV-9. She was now an anti-submarine warfare carrier, CV-9. Her enemy was no longer the Zero. It was the Soviet submarine. For the next decade, the Essex played a deadly game of cat and mouse in the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. She was the shield keeping the Soviet nuclear threat at bay. But her most frustrating moment came in 1961, the Bay of Pigs. Essex was there, parked off the coast of Cuba. Her deck was loaded with A4 Skyhawks, painted over to hide their American identity. Her pilots were sitting in their cockpits, engines screaming, begging for the order to launch and save the invasion force dying on the beach. But the order never came. President Kennedy, fearing World War III, kept the Essex on a leash. The crew had to listen to the radio screams of their allies being slaughtered, unable to fire a shot. It was a bitter pill, but the Essex would get her chance to save the world soon enough. October 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. The world stood on the razor's edge of nuclear annihilation. Soviet missiles were in Cuba. American ships were forming a blockade. And leading the hunt, the USS Essex. This wasn't a drill. The Essex Task Group located a contact, a Soviet Foxtrot-class submarine, the B-59, lurking deep beneath the waves, trying to sneak through the blockade. The Essex destroyers began dropping signaling depth charges, small explosives meant to annoy the sub, to force it to surface. Ping! Ping! Boom! But the Americans didn't know one terrifying fact. The B-59 was armed with a nuclear torpedo. Inside the sub, the air was foul. The temperature was over 100 degrees, and they hadn't heard from Moscow in days. When the depth charges started banging against the hull, the captain panicked. He thought World War III had already started. He ordered the nuclear torpedo to be readied. He screamed, "We're gonna blast them now. We will die, but we will sink them all." The target of that nuclear torpedo? The USS Essex. If he fired, the Essex would vaporize. The US would retaliate with nukes on Moscow. Humanity ends. But one man stood in the way. Vasily Arkhipov, the Soviet flotilla commander aboard the sub, refused to authorize the launch. A shouting match ensued in the sweating, stinking control room of that submarine. Arkhipov won. The sub surfaced. The crew of the Essex lined the rails, looking down at the Russians. They waved. They took photos. They had no idea they had been seconds away from being the first casualties of the apocalypse. The Essex had won the battle without firing a shot.
Surviving World War II was a miracle. Preventing nuclear war was a duty, but the Essex's third life would be her most noble. 1968, the space race. NASA was preparing for Apollo 7, the first manned mission of the Apollo program. This was the mission that would pave the way to the moon. But space travel has a watery ending. NASA needed a ship reliable enough to find a tiny capsule in a massive ocean. They chose the old lady. October 22nd, 1968, north of Puerto Rico, the Essex turned her radars to the sky. Not scanning for kamikazes, not scanning for Soviet bombers, scanning for 3 American heroes. Splashdown. Helicopters from the Essex, descendants of the planes she carried in World War II, hovered over the capsule. When astronauts Wally Schirra, Don Eisel, and Walter Cunningham stepped onto the flight deck of the Essex, 2 eras collided. The heroes of the greatest war in history were shaking hands with the heroes of the future. The ship built for death was now a vessel of life.
But time is undefeated. The Essex was old. Her hull, laid down when battleships still ruled the waves, was tired. The supercarriers of the Nimitz class were being born. There was no place left for the warrior of 1942. In 1969, she was decommissioned for the final time. Veterans tried to save her. They wanted to make her a museum, a monument to the indestructible ship. But the cost was too high. In 1975, the torches that cut her apart weren't repairing battle damage, they were erasing her. The USS Essex was turned into scrap metal. But you cannot scrap a legacy. The steel of the Essex might be in your car, your refrigerator, or the beams of a skyscraper, but her spirit remains in the history books. She was the avenger of Pearl Harbor, the survivor of the kamikaze, the jailer of the Soviet Union, and the cradle of the astronauts. 3 lives, 1 legend. If you enjoyed this journey through history, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments which of the Essex's 3 lives was the most impressive: the warrior, the sentinel, or the explorer. Thanks for watching.